And Joan is the chair of the great debate.
Thank you very much, Joe. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Cool. If you can't see me from down that end, it's probably an advantage, but if you do want to move up a bit, please feel free, because I can't stand for the length of time that I normally do at the moment, having had an argument with the ground. And I tell you, the ground fights back much worse than others. However, it's serendipity really, because Stella and I are now setting the pattern. We're sitting at the table, or at least we two are, for this debate. So I do apologise for not standing up. I'm very pleased to be chairing the debate, but before I start, what I wanted to do was just say thank you to all the organisers of the Communities in Control conference, because all the people working out the back, Rhonda, Joe, Dennis, all the people, because I just think as I watch this and listen to this parade of people sharing their knowledge with us, I don't know that I ever go to a conference which is more knowledge-packed and more interactive. So could we put our hands together for the organisers? Now, as you know, I'm a very fair chairperson. I don't let my views get in the way at all, and I stick to the rules. So this time, instead of having a bell, we're actually going to dim the lights when you're at the 1 minute stage, and then the lights will be totally dimmed when you're at your 10-minute stage. So each speaker speaks for 10 minutes, and then the two leaders of the debate have the right of reply for 5 minutes. So you won't be any mistaking when your time's up, I don't think. I just want to say a few other things before I introduce our debaters today. The first thing is, I've been sitting there for part of this conference feeling really as though we've got a great opportunity. I just feel the world has turned on its axis just a little bit, and that we can keep propelling it towards social inclusion if we unite the power in this conference, and it is considerable power, if we unite the power in this conference and keep tilting the axis towards social inclusion. Now, I haven't felt that for something like 20 years. And I reckon, how many other people feel that there's just a chance that we just might be? Yeah, that's how I feel. Now, I felt like that when I was very much younger. When I was, no, I won't say how old I was, but coming into the early 70s. How many of you weren't alive then? Serious. I hope a lot of you weren't alive then, otherwise we oldies are capturing the debate. But I just feel that chance is there, and that what we need to do is go out from this conference and exercise our power to change, not just with good intentions, and that's why I was so glad of Kath's moving that motion following up Pat Turner's great address, but with connection and with an understanding that power really can come from people, this number of people joining together. And it's also serendipity, which is something I'm not really used to, that last night I was reading a book that I'd ordered from the New Internationalist, and it's called, and I'm sure some of you have read this, it's called The Great Neighbourhood Book. How many of you have read it? Not too many? Well, I recommend it, and it's not the first book I'm going to recommend today. It's a do-it-yourself guide to placemaking. All the emphasis on neighbourhood building that we've had. And it's by a Canadian guy called J. Jasper. And it's available from New Society Publishers. But it starts off with a series of recommendations, as many books do. And one of them is from Jim Hightower, who's the author of a wonderful book called Thieves in High Places. What a great name, Thieves in High Places. And he says, and I think this sums up many of the people at this conference, we're often told that regular people have no power anymore. But when they get together with their neighbours to work on important issues in their own backyard, anything is possible. Jay regales us with stories of folks all over the country who've rolled up their sleeves to make big changes in their neighbourhood and the world. So read on, get riled up, roll up your sleeves and take power. I hope that's the effect of this conference. And it's the topic, is it not, of this debate. Whether you feel all downhearted and depressed about global issues and you can't do anything because global issues are pressing down on you and they'll decide. You know those people over there? They's a cop-out, isn't it, really? They'll decide is really a cop-out. Mind you, I'd probably be feeling a lot younger and healthier if I hadn't kept saying they's a cop-out and attacking them, but never mind. But they, to me, talking about they, to me, is a cop-out. Talking about what we can do is a step towards progress. Now, that doesn't mean to say that from time to time I don't just put my head in my hands and think, what do you do? All our good intentions, what do you do? And then I see someone like Pat Turner speak with such passion, and I think, well, how dare I put my hands in my head in my hands and think, what do you do? It's all hopeless. Because if you've got the passion, you can have the power. And I can see in this room people I've known for some 30 years who've maintained the passion. And if you maintain the passion for equity, you can retain or regain the power. Now, you probably won't be surprised to think that I think that this debate is two sides of the coin. One side of the coin's global, the other side of the coin is local. Now, for me, both sides of the coin are important. So what a terrible chair to actually come to a compromise before we've had the debate. But I figure I might get a word in later, so Dennis said I could do it now. The second point that I want to make is that I am hopeful because I also think that for the first time in ages federally, government is listening. You're right, government is not necessarily doing all that we would like it to do, but I just feel it is listening. Maybe it's because I'm lucky enough to know that people like Jenny Macklin and Tanya Plibersek live in their own communities and work in their own communities. Maybe it's that's a special privilege that I have because I've known them for years. But I always feel more comfortable when I know that the people who represent me are actually experiencing some of the things that I've experienced as a community activist. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I feel the language has changed a bit. I was in the intensive care unit at Epworth when Kevin made the apology. Prime Minister, I should say, made the apology. No, I should say Prime Minister. His name's Kevin. I'd be changing my name, actually, if it were, but we won't go on with that. At least Joan's pretty plain, it doesn't suggest much. But I was lying there in ICU and there was no television. And I knew that the next morning that this apology was going to be on and I wouldn't be there, but at least I had to see it. Now, you're not exactly the most powerful person when you're lying there in ICU. Marvellous nursing, I must say, absolutely fabulous. But there I was, thinking, how do I achieve this? How do I break the rules, get a television set into ICU, and be allowed to watch it? So what did I do? What I usually do, what I'm sure all you have done in your past and current lives, I asked. I summed up the various people around me and I looked at the most promising doctor. And now that I'm about to be 70, it wasn't the most promising in looks, it was the most promising in sympathy. And so I said to him, Joe, because I'd already discovered his first name. He knew mine, why should not I not knew his? And I said to him, Joe, do you think do you want to watch the apology? He said, oh yeah, I'd love to, but I'm on duty. And I said, well, do you ever have a television set in ICU? And he said, oh, not very often. And I said, who makes the decisions round here? And he said, oh, I suppose I do. And I said, that's terrific, Joe. How long would it take? So anyway, we got the television set. I'm forever in his debt. And, well, I probably am. He's a medical person anyway. And myself, of course, it had to be strategically placed because I couldn't get out of bed. So was down the end of my bed, and fortunately my two people who were in other beds next to me, they were happy to watch it, and their nurses were 1-to-1 in ICU, crikey. And Joe watched it as well, of course. And I was sitting there riveted, and then I looked up, and almost every nurse in the ward had deserted her patient and come to watch the sorry debate, and everyone was standing there with tears rolling down their faces. And I thought, I wouldn't have believed this would happen 6 months ago. The language of respect wasn't there. And that's what it's about. Respect for everyone as an equal, with equal human rights and equal entitlements, which we took away, and now we've only taken the first step to returning them, not giving them back, returning them. So you can even have power, the message is, when you're in ICU. And it's not because I was the former Premier. It was just because, well, it might have been a little bit, but it was because I had the courage to ask. And anyway, I wasn't much of a threat lying there flat on my back. So for me, this debate could be a bringing together of two important points of view. The global point of view, what is it made up of? Is it made up of people up there making decisions? Or can it be made up of a group of communities linking with people in power, in their kind of power, linking with our kind of power to create a greater power? See, I've always had a very strange view of power. I suppose because as a mum in the early days, I had to bake cakes for the Mothers Club Fete. Thank God I grew out of those days. You know how my kids actually judge whether I was a good mum or not? They judged me not as a good mum because they never had homemade cake in their lunches. It's too late now. I make it up for the grandchildren, but I can't do anything about my children. So when you bake a cake, I see power a bit like that. You bake a cake, there it is, all nicely baked, family waiting to eat it. Some people have the view that if you take a slice of that cake and hand it to someone, the actual amount of cake gets smaller. My view is you cut the cake a bit smaller and you share it, and if you know those people are there, then you put more ingredients into the cake because you've got more people sharing, and you make a bigger cake. And that's what we can do if we put global and local together. So I now want to introduce the debaters. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here because last year I actually didn't like somebody on the panel. And as you notice, we kind of sparred a bit. He was very nice to me, but I could see no reason why. He'd only been nice to me once ever in his life, or agreed with me, which is being nice to me. I couldn't see why I should be terribly nice to him, as you notice. But anyway, today I like everyone on the panel. Perhaps they don't reciprocate, so we'll still get a lively debate. But I've worked with all of them, and so it's a great pleasure to share this debate with them. And thank you, whoever chose the participants. The first participant, and the debate, I should say, no, we'll go through and introduce you all first. I should tell you what the debate is. I'll just make sure we have the topic right. It is, in the face of the enormity of global threats, local action is a waste of time. In the face of the enormity of global threats, local action is a waste of time. Boo hiss, I hear from some parts of the audience. For the others, I hear, yeah, I get dispirited by that sometimes too. So I think it is a live debate in the community. Now, the people who are going to take the affirmative, that it is a waste of time, are Jenny McGregor and Meredith Carter. Can I tell you something about them before the debate begins, and then I'll tell you something about those in the dissenting team. In the affirmative, we first have the leader, Jenny McGregor. Jenny, could you just stand up so people can see you? There we go. Jenny is the founding director and chief executive officer of the University of Melbourne's Asia Link Centre, an organisation that promotes public understanding of the countries in Asia and of Australia's role in the region. It was, in fact, an organisation, I think, before its time, and now hopefully has reached its time in terms of leadership. Under her leadership, Asia Link has become Australia's largest such centre, with an annual budget of more than $8 million and activities throughout the region, spanning education, arts, media and corporate and public programs. Jenny is also on the advisory board of the Asia Institute, the Dunlop Asia Awards, and a member of the APEC Women's Leaders Network. She's previously worked as a political advisor and senior manager in the Australian and Victorian governments. So please welcome Jenny. On her team is a woman that I always like to have on my team, and that's Meredith Carter. Meredith is CEO of Kindergarten Parents Victoria. That's the peak body for community managed kinders in Victoria, and it promotes the voice of about 60,000 Victorian parents. I don't know whether Meredith knows this, but when I could see that I wasn't with my team going to win the 1992 election, my mind turned to what I really had to do before I left, and in part, which community groups I had to make sure were still strong enough to stand up and be counted on social justice. I know it's a terrible thing to be thinking about, but that's the thing I thought about. And just at that time, KPV had just started, and they didn't have a government grant. And I don't know whether the original people are still involved, but if they were, when they came to see me, they were very impressive. And they said that they were going to give government hell if if appropriate support wasn't provided for both the organisation and for parents in kinders and their kids. And I thought, an organisation that's going to give the next government hell. What a great idea. So I funded them. Of course, they had excellent principles of equity and all those things. And it has really demonstrated its worth. And I'm so glad now, and I know Meredith is, that early childhood services are now seen as absolute linchpin of children's growth and success. And many of us have worked for that for a long time. But of course, Meredith has only just become, or relatively recently become, the Kinder Parents Victoria CEO. She's had more than 20 years' experience at senior levels across the private, public and not-for-profit sector, and has a reputation for very effective advocacy and campaigns promoting law reform and community participation in policy development. And I'm sure she would have been blown away by Fran's excellent presentation earlier this morning. She trained as a lawyer. She has a diverse background in community affairs, and I got to know her even better when she was an advisor to former Victorian Premier Steve Bracks on social reform agenda, and particularly Fairer Victoria. So please welcome Meredith. Stand up. And now I will introduce the speakers for the negative. And who's surprised that Deb Kilroy is speaking for the negative? Not me, because do you know Deb's story? Some of you will. You'll recall that she won Community Idol how many years ago? 2, is it? 2? About that? 3. Deb, I was given some words to say about Deb, but I'm not going to say them. So I've actually taken these from the back of her book. Have you got the book there, Ms. Kilroy? Yeah. That's right. I didn't hear that. None of you heard that she's going to award it to people who vote for her, did you? No. No. Deb, I've read her fantastic book, Kilroy Was Here, and the back of that book says, Deb Kilroy was locked up and abused at 13, a mother at 17, married to a celebrity footballer at 25, jailed for drug trafficking and violence, and witness, I should say, to a violent murder at 28, in prison, I think, yeah. Just 12 years later, she was awarded the Order of Australia for her fearless campaigning for the rights of women prisoners through her groundbreaking advocacy group, Sisters Inside. And I'm also pleased to welcome Anne Warner here, who's the president of, where is she? There she is, Sisters Inside, Anne, a former parliamentary colleague. What sent a decent working class kid out of control and into the care of the state so young? What enabled her to step off the merry-go-round of violence, drug dealing and prison to remake her life? When she was jailed in 1989, she lost almost everything. Not only her freedom, her husband, her 2 children and her home. Inside, she was viciously stabbed and witnessed the murder of a friend. This tragedy marked a turning point and the beginning of the battle to turn her life around. After her release, Kilroy began a painstaking journey towards reconciliation with Jo and her children and fulfilling a promise. I said to the women in Bulgo Road, I'll be back. I believe that all you've got in this world is your word and nothing else. And if I can't keep my word, I'm nobody. The seeds of Sisters Inside were sown. Today, Deb is light years away from who I was. That's her words. Recognised internationally for founding Sisters Inside, most recently with a Human Rights Medal, she is now, and this book says, studying to become a barrister, but she has now been admitted as a lawyer in Queensland. So can we please say congratulations? I remember my first meeting with Deb. A friend of mine, Molly Robson, ex-Polly, pulled me across and said, "You've got to meet Deb." And I thought, wow, what a woman. And even then, I didn't know what she did. But when you see people the way Deb does, that is, see people as people with a contribution to make, you understand why with prisons we often get it so wrong. And Joe Caddy sees the same thing, that we lose respect for their ability to make a different future, and therefore we treat them often in the wrong way. So welcome, Deb, and she is joined by the other member of her team, Stella Young. I said to Stella yesterday, she should be called Ms. Achiever. She really is quite an extraordinary young woman, and I've just had the pleasure of working with her on a committee. She's a journalist. She's been a presenter on the award-winning No Limits television program on Melbourne's Channel 31. You probably saw it touring around here with a friend on the camera, or a fellow worker on the camera. Now, I had a very interesting discussion with Deb one day, and it was about the difficulties of getting a permanent job. Now, I know all the talent she's got, but she was still having difficulty getting a permanent job. But she'd applied for a proper job at Melbourne Museum. And to my absolute delight, that was a permanent job, and she got it. And then to my absolute delight, as a member of the museum board, I rocked up with my grandchildren to a circus performance they were putting on, a bee circus, and there she was, drawing bees, telling jokes about bees. That is bees, you know, the busy ones, not the other sort that we deal with everyday life. Real bees. But you never know how you're going to see Stella, because one day I opened the newspaper and there she was, sitting on a chair, surrounded by roses, looking like the queen of the Mardi Gras festival. She's worked as communications coordinator for Arts Access Victoria. I desperately needed her to coach me before I sang I Love Rock and Roll, but I didn't know her then. She's been a member of the Victorian Disability Advisory Council and the Ministerial Advisory Council for the Department of Victorian Communities, and she's currently a member of the board of Grit Media and the steering committee for the Youth Disability Advocacy Service. Please welcome Stella. So now to begin the debate. 10 minutes each, lights down at 9, lights out at 10. Reminds me of nurse training. Okay. First speaker for the affirmative is Jenny McGregor. Jenny, welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I do need to start with a warning, and I'll return to this later. You, the audience, are the jury, and our beloved former Premier is the adjudicator. So Meredith and I really need a fair trial here. Therefore, you need to understand the performance indicators right from the start.
Oh, my God.
Rhonda told us to be funny and to be helpful. She has also given us the impossible position of persuading 1,500 of you that local action is a waste of time. 80% of you come from grassroots organisations. And we're told you've all gone to a lot of trouble to come to a conference called Communities in Control. Well, we would like you to take control. Take control of your hearts as well as your heads, and give us a fair go. The warning is here. We know we're the underdog, and we're asking you for objective judgments, and there'll be more later. The current coalition of global challenges has been described as a perfect storm. Global warming, growing food and water shortages, growing threats of pandemics, more unstable states acquiring nuclear weapons, and the rise of terrorism. And now we're told the Gulf Stream is cooling and may stop flowing completely. Last time this happened, the world entered an ice age that lasted thousands of years. So if we're all headed for one of the nastiest levels of Dante's Inferno, remember Dante's Hell with 9 levels of horrible fates? One of them, you are buried in ice up to your lower eyelashes. Imagine that, just staring out at the ice age all around you. Yeah. So if we're all going to be starving, sick, and frozen stiff, what on earth is the point of local action? You can't wash your kids' footy clothes when you've got cholera or malaria from a global pandemic. There's no need to do the dishes if there's a global famine, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of point of having your legs waxed, your eyebrows plucked, or even having a Brazilian if the ice age means there's no beach. There is absolutely no doubt that local action, particularly housework and personal grooming, are a total waste of time. Local action like harvesting your veggie scraps, composting your veggie scraps, harvesting your shower water, even downsizing from, I'm sure all of you have Range Rovers, to a new made-in-Australia hybrid Camry is worse than a waste of time. It's actually going to make you all feel better, in fact make you feel quite virtuous, and make not a whit of difference to the impending global catastrophes facing our children. Just take China. With over 1.3 billion people, we all know that China is the world's largest and most populous country. 1 in every 5 people on the planet lives in China. China builds a new city the size of Australia every year. But only 1% of the country's 560 million city dwellers breathe air considered safe by the European Union. And of course, China's problem is the world's problem. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide from China's coal-fired power plants, it's even hard to say, falls as acid rain on South Korea and Japan. And much of the particulate pollution over the west coast of America comes from China. By the end of this year, China will overtake the US as the world's leading producer of greenhouse gases. And I haven't even started on India. India will be the world's most populous country by 2030 and is also growing at historically unprecedented rates with similar environmental challenges for the globe. So what's the use of local action here in Melbourne, Australia, or even more useless in Kilroy? We could close down Australia tomorrow and make 1.8% of difference to global emissions. And what about world food shortages, ladies and gentlemen? 1 in 6 countries in the world now face food shortages because of severe drought that will become semi-permanent under climate change. The World Bank believes that 33 countries are in danger of being destabilised by food price inflation. And UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon says that higher food prices are wiping out progress towards reducing poverty and will harm global security. The President of the World Bank says that food inflation could push 100 million people back into poverty, obliterating the gains of a decade of economic growth. More than 800 million people still go hungry at night, and even in India, where the Green Revolution made some of its biggest strides, 50% of children in rural areas are malnourished. At the other end of the scale, the second richest country on earth, Japan, is now experiencing food shortages that saw Tokyo run out of butter this year. A 130% rise in the global cost of wheat in the past year, caused partly by surging demand from China and India, is threatening Japanese food supplies. In April, the Japanese government discovered it had exhausted its $2.37 billion budget for wheat 2 months before the end of the financial year. It was forced to call on $541 million worth of reserves to ensure it could continue feeding the Japanese nation. Japanese food experts said this was the first time the government has had to take such drastic action since the war. That's nearly 60 years ago. But with not even 21 million people in Australia, barely 3% of the world's population, it's hardly even worth us giving up our quest to be world leaders in obesity and binge drinking. Why shouldn't we live on cakes and Alco Pops and drive our four-wheel drives till the lights go out on planet Earth? Let me share with you a personal case study on what a total waste of time local action really is. In the mid-1980s, when Rhonda Galbally ran the Commission for the Future, and I worked there, the Commission ran a visionary project on climate change. Our colleagues made a film together with CSIRO scientists that was every bit as powerful as Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. Our film won a UN Environment Award, and we all thought the world would start to change. The Commission for the Future employed someone to work on carbon trading, some weird economist's concept that no normal person had heard of in 1987. The logic of the film and the logic of carbon trading was unarguable, but no one was listening. Local action, and this was Australian local action, not local action, can't even say it, was a total waste of time. Actually, local action is often much worse than a waste of time. It is positively dangerous. Sydney Jones is a colleague of mine who lives in Indonesia, works for the International Crisis Group, and is the world expert on Jemaah Islamiyah. Remember JI? They're the guys responsible for the Bali bombing, the attacks on the Australian Embassy in Jakarta, and the Hilton Hotel bombing. Sydney Jones describes how JI is so much more than a terrorist network. It's a local social network, sort of like the Country Women's Association. The children attend schools together. The mothers shop and cook and chat together. The families play together. So taking out the leaders of JI, as Indonesia has successfully done in recent times, leaves behind a robust community association, well set up to produce a new generation of terrorists. Local action at its most productive. They might even be picking up a few tips from the Our Community website, I thought. Similarly in India, where I've been focused in the last few years, local action so often stops development that it would improve sanitation, public health and standards of living. In the interests of preserving the status quo, local action is precisely why India lags so far behind China in bringing its people out of poverty. And before I leave India and China and security, what about what might be the biggest global challenge facing us all? Running out of water. The scientists tell us we're now in a permanent state of demand for water outstripping supply. This is no cyclical drought scenario. The US now sees water as a national security issue. China is putting in a giant pipeline to divert water from the Tibetan Himalayas so they can make sunglasses, toys and microwave ovens for the world. India has 24 million water bores right now. I go back to my earlier point, what is the use of me pouring my shower on my veggies? What is local action anyway? I don't even understand what it is anymore. I used to believe, think global, act local. But globalisation is happening so fast, I don't even know how to define local. The people I work with communities of colleagues all over the world. So this is an example of 21st century local action, us working together online with our colleagues. What about cyberspace? 1.6 million people using the World Wide Web already. And Barack Obama raising $300 million for his campaign with 80% raised online. Ladies and gentlemen, all this goes to prove that ourcommunity.com.au is a virtual place to be. You don't see anyone under 30 without a full-on Facebook or MySpace presence. We all need to recognise the power of the cyber world and get in there to make a real difference to the only issues that really count, human survival and global equity.
Well done. And the first speaker for the in dissent is Deb Kilroy.
All right, that's a dud.
Oh, there's sabotage going on
Yeah,
here.
sabotage. And you notice Joan says she's neutral and sitting on the other side.
You know I always sit on the right.
Oh! You said it, not me. Before I start, I do want to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land, the Wurundjeri people, and I thank Auntie Joy yesterday for her beautiful welcome to country, and I accept her invitation to be here today on the Wurundjeri people's land. I want to thank our community as well for the invite and acknowledge colleagues in the audience that I work with both in Queensland and across the country, and even my local soccer team member is here as well that I just discovered, so from home. I also want to acknowledge if there's any women here that have been criminalised and spent time in prison. I'd like to hear your voice and what you've got to think on the matter of local action, local issues in regards to global threats. I know when you're sitting in a prison cell, you're not thinking too much about what's happening over in Bali or, the Ice Age, really. You're thinking about what's happening to you on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis and the brutality that you're experiencing. And with 1,500 of you wonderful people here that work in the community sector, the other team saying that what we do means nothing, absolutely nothing. And I know you as well as I disagree, that every minute of our lives and the passion that we hold and the work that we do absolutely means everything to each and every one of us and to the people that we walk with in the community. I'm going to tell a bit of a story about Sisters Inside, because Sisters Inside's known around Australia and overseas, but it started with a handful of women, of voiceless and powerless women on the south side of Brisbane about 16 years ago. Women in prison have no voice, they have no liberty, physically or psychologically. But at that time in Brisbane, a movement to take some control grew, directly out of the prison experience of myself and other women. It was limited control, sure, but it was about opportunity to get an education, to get a job, to keep in contact with our families, to keep our children so they weren't removed by the state. And it worked because it was not about individualism or ego. We had a progressive government and administration at that time that made that possible in Queensland. But it is effective because it was in the hands of the women themselves. We had control, we had the power. And it was local action and still is. The organisation that grew from it, Sisters Inside, was successful because it worked from within the hearts and souls of the women ourselves. It was conceived as an organisation run for women in prison by women in prison. We knew that we wanted and what we needed, and that's what Sisters Inside provided, as we still do today, whether it's sexual assault counselling, drug and alcohol counselling, employment training, post-release support, connection with children, youth workers to work with young people who are in detention centres. Sisters Inside has always and still is run by a committee of women in prison, as well as on the outside. And the inside steering committee of that organisation, my organisation, our organisation of women prisoners, is the beating heart of the organisation. It informs everything we do and how we do it. So even if we're in prison with ice up to our eyeballs, we will still decide how we're going to get rid of the ice. In this way, it is truly in the hands of those it serves, the women. In this way, it stays true to its vision. It's authentic, it reflects the real experiences of us as women, and it is true to them. Since then, the organisation has grown and prospered, offering a wider range of services, as I described just before, and we also advocate for the human rights of women in the criminal justice system, a broader advocacy role that we didn't actually intend to take on or have that vision early on the piece back when we were sitting in prison, where we over the years have dragged the reality of prisons into the wider consciousness of the public, and even here today. In my time inside prison, I saw daily and unforgettably how the words human rights can seem ludicrous to someone whose experience leaves you feeling barely human anymore. Sisters Inside has successfully brought the fundamental lack of human rights in women's prisons to the fore in public inquiries across several jurisdictions in this country. Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales, and more recently tabled in Parliament in the Northern Territory last Friday. Reviews and investigations into the abuses of women in prison across those jurisdictions. In a best-selling book, in a Human Rights Medal, an Order of Australia, and through an international network of associations that we work with very closely. And of course, there is always the resistance to local action, as we all know. And ours has come in all shapes and sizes, but none larger than the current Minister for Corrections in our state, Judy Spence. Sisters Inside has so rattled her cage that she has tried several avenues to make the organisation go away, disappear, be silenced, have no voice. In one of these, she succeeded in preventing the management committee from holding its regular monthly meetings with the steering committee of women inside the women's prison. And if she thought this would magically bring about our disappearance, she was gravely wrong, because the grassroots, the local action, will always be there, and we've found other ways to communicate. If it's not face-to-face and monthly management meetings, it's through many other avenues that she has not been able to stop, and she will not stop. We're in touch with what the women need, and we're proud of our local action. We're proud of our grassroots organisation, and women feel proud to be part of that. And we're not going anywhere fast. Governments come and go, ministers come and go, but we're here for the long run, as you all are in your day-to-day work with the people that you walk with. And we will survive because, unlike Minister Spence, our approach is not power over anyone, it's power with the women we walk with. It's about local action, and I have to tell you, I don't think it's a waste of time. And that's what grassroots organisations are all about, and where the high majority of you in this room come from and believe in. That's why you're here participating, and of course, no doubt, going to vote against the other side. And it's interesting, as we had conversations, myself with Anne Warner and Pat Turner over the last couple of days, because we're in the same motel, and talking about this debate and remembering Minister Spence, it brought us, I suppose, into the forefront of our minds, thinking of Burma's military junta. And in Burma, people have been prevented from banding together by the junta, and which has the power right now, the junta. But all tyrannies eventually overreach themselves, like Spence, like the junta. Grassroots organisations in Burma, its monks for that matter, are about meeting people's needs and will triumph exactly because of that. They cannot separate them from the people, as we will not be separated from women in prison in this country and around the world. And that's what some people try to do, who take their power and use it in an abusive way. This is what global threats are all about, misuse of power. In the end, grassroots organisations, local action will always triumph. It may take time, but particularly in times of crisis and in a world of crisis, local action will flourish, not diminish. All of us here are thriving. There's over 1,000 people here, 1,500 I think. We will not be turned away from those that we work with, those that we believe it's an approach of power with, not power over. And as long as we stay in touch with people's needs, represent people's needs, share people's needs and walk with people, we'll always be there and be effective. And it's interesting that the other side, Jenny, seems to be quite confused about the debate point, because she seems to have got globalisation confused with global climate change, and they are two separate things, as we know from local action. And there's different things that we need to take into account working at that grassroots level and in local action. Local action is power with and not power over. We don't take threats lightly, but we will stand up to them, and we will mow them down in any small or large way we can as a community sector. And I just, the lights haven't been dimmed for me, so I'm just going to come to an end. And just, I don't know who said this, but I'm happy for someone to tell me who did, but I thought it's quite relevant at this moment, and that is, silence is complicity and speaking out is about change. And all of us from the grassroots, from local action groups, we talk and we are about change. A threat will always be a threat, whether it's local or global. It doesn't really matter, because we're not scared of it. Thank you.
And of course, Deb would never make a threat. Never.
No, promise.
Promise. Thanks very much, Deb. That was fantastic. And now I'd like to welcome to the debating team Meredith Carter, who speaks on behalf of the affirmative. Meredith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think perhaps I'm on this side despite my work at Kindergarten Parents Victoria, and before that at Health Issues Centre, because Rhonda knows that I never bake cakes. So clearly, my daughter actually complains that she says, she's a teenager, she says that she would eat her lunch if I made it.
It's catching, isn't it?
It is catching. Anyway, it hasn't worked so far. Okay, so you've listened to one of our opponents so far, and Deb's had a good go at trying to muddy the waters by focusing on issues that really are a bit irrelevant to the point of this debate. She's been talking about local action, fantastic and very moving local action, I have to say. And I think local action is great. Obviously, the other side thinks local action is great. But have a look at the lineup along this table. Why are they here? Why are you here? It's not because of local action that you're here or because you are local activists. It's because you are political activists. And that is what this statement is asking you to say. In the face of the enormity of global threats, local action is a waste of time. Political action is what is required, at whatever level it works. So our message to you is, of course, the statement that we're debating is true. Local action by itself might make you feel better, it might even do some good, but it isn't enough, not nearly enough to deal with the threats, local often, and global, that are facing us. What's required is political action. And as my team leader has argued, often that political action needs to be cyber action as well. Let me give you an example close to home about some of these global threats. Oil prices. Might have been listening to John Fain yesterday, or looked at the headline in the Age that said 56% of the population, it seems, are calling on. I find that really amazing. 56% of the population are obsessed with petrol prices. But anyway, according to the Age headline, people are demanding that Rudd do something about oil prices, fuel prices, petrol. And so people are turning to local action. They're riding their bikes, they're catching public transport. Some people are even shelling out $30,000 to convert their cars to electricity. And the federal government's pitching in with Fuel Watch. But what makes a real difference to fuel prices? Global threats. Every time George Bush, for example, threatens to invade Iran, you watch oil prices, see what happens to them. They go sky high. Fuel Watch is, sadly, not going to do much about that. And Rudd, in fact, admits as much. He's calling for global action, political action, on what he nominates, along with rising food prices, which are, of course, related to fuel prices, as the most significant challenge facing the global economy. And so he wants the blowtorch applied to OPEC, a political body, to force the world's top oil producers to boost output. Some global political action. And what else might help? Maybe a new president in the US to help cool down the Middle East crisis. That might help. Go, Obama! Anyway, we also need to get very serious because, as my colleague has eloquently described to you, when we're talking about global threats, well-targeted political action really is necessary to ensure human survival in very many cases. Our health is central to the ability to live and to thrive, so I want to focus on the need for global action on health. Rhonda asked us to be humorous, but I have to say I'm not great on jokes. So I'm going to look at health. We can make Australia a fairer, healthier place for all Australians. And I'm doing my bit, running Kindergarten Parents Victoria. That'll be a good thing. Get all those little kids into kindergarten. Produces great outcomes for them and for our community. But it's not enough. Across the world, children will continue to die of preventable diseases like diarrhoea. Children die in very large numbers across the world from diarrhoea. Malaria is another one. Diseases like tuberculosis are also on the rise again, in large part due to the continued inability in many countries around the world to afford complete treatment of TB. A bit hard for us to imagine in Australia. So as the World Health Assembly president, a guy called Shield, said in 1951, the world cannot remain half healthy and half sick and still maintain its economic, moral and spiritual equilibrium. And like organisations from the World Health Organization to the Rockefeller Foundation and various other political agencies around the world, they argued that what we need is well-targeted political action to produce global equity in health. So I'm not even going to start telling you about the 418 billion people across the world currently infected with hepatitis, the despair expressed in biomedicine today that the unrecognised importance, danger and costs of hepatitis in the 21st century cannot be understated or underestimated. So let's put some local action on the scales, particularly apolitical local action on the scales, and weigh it up against some of those threats. Will local action really ensure people around the globe survive and thrive in the face of these threats? No, it won't. They're issues of human survival, they're of social justice, they're issues we can't ignore. And in the face of the desperate need and the knowledge that local action is not enough, in these circumstances, local action alone may well be immoral. HIV/AIDS is another continuing global problem that demands urgent global solutions. There's 33 million people currently living with HIV. It's up from around 8 million in 1990, so it's growing. How many of you realise that? I didn't until I started researching this for this debate, but it's really pretty shocking. And of the millions of people in immediate need of life-saving AIDS drugs, less than 30% are receiving those drugs. And behind the numbers, which are pretty hard to get your head around, are the personal tragedies. So many of the people infected are young people, young mothers often, and they and their countries have to make political decisions about whether they save the mothers or save the child. And so in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, what usually happens is that the mother gets the drugs to deal with HIV while she's pregnant. So she has the baby's free of HIV, hopefully, and then she dies. So there are now 12 million African children that are AIDS orphans. And in addition to those kids, 500,000 children are born with HIV each year. And it's tearing apart the basic fabric of society in many developing countries. So in addition to human survival, we are also talking about global equity. Global action and serious political action is desperately needed to make the world a healthier and more equitable place. It's why the World Health Organization calls for better health for all. And if the unfairness and immorality of failure to act globally to help those less able to help themselves isn't sufficiently persuasive, let me make it more concrete for you. If global threats are not attacked where they arise, then they grow and they threaten us all. So TB, for example, is not just an immediate health emergency for the people living and dying with those illnesses in their own countries. Their inability to afford treatment is leading to growing rates of drug-resistant TB in the Western world as well. TB is back in Australia. And it's increasingly unresponsive to the barrage of heavy-duty antibiotics that we have available. So drug-resistant TB will and is spreading in Australia, and simply trying to treat infected individuals or even communities here is very well-meaning, but it's really putting our heads in the sand. Global health problems are threats to us as well, not only in health terms. These, the ongoing scourge of these diseases represent broader risks. Like other global inequities in health, not only do they decimate families and undermine economic productivity because the labour force is sick, they feed poverty and social alienation. They lead to violence. They lead to, ultimately, the destabilisation of whole countries. You think what millions and millions of orphans, people this is the situation in Africa today. Millions of orphans basically trying to grow up and run their countries. Pretty difficult. And the destabilisation of these countries threatens us all. That's the nature of global threats. If you don't act on them where they arise, they represent serious threats to the rest of us. So, as the World Health Assembly argued in 1951, on top of all the other arguments, it's a matter of global equilibrium. It's the interconnectedness of global threats that means acting locally is not enough. We live in a global village. We have to deal with global threats by acting politically. And unless the world becomes a healthier and fairer place for all its citizens, we do nothing about increasing the security of all our people and improving the chances of those worst off. So what can make a difference? International sanctions, increased international aid, reform of international patenting laws to ensure drugs are actually affordable in poor countries.
You're about
All
to
of those
lose your
things
head.
help. And well-targeted action in cyberspace is also the way to go. So if you really want to make a difference, make sure it's well-targeted political action. And I'd suggest do some of it in cyberspace. Go to Avert, nice little cyberspace spot, and make a difference to an AIDS orphan today. Thank you.
You know what, Meredith, I think you should continue to make a difference by joining Fran and being on one of the World Health Organisation committees. That would be terrific, I think, don't you? She'd be a great advocate for us. Okay, and last but certainly not least, Stella Young for the negative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to make any apologies for not standing up. But I might point out our opponent's blatant disregard of our attempt to keep this debate physically equal. When asked to debate the issue at hand today, I was overwhelmed by how on earth I could possibly argue something that makes so much bloody sense. How on earth could I argue this, especially to you? And because it made so much sense, I had no idea what I was going to say. But I didn't think Rhonda would be too pleased if I got up here and just said, in the face of such enormous global threats, local action is a waste of time. Not. So I pulled my socks up and started thinking about why I know local action is important. Firstly, it can't exist without community. So when we think about community, what do we think of? Are we just part of the community in which we geographically reside? Or is it something more than that? Someone posed that question to me recently, and it got me thinking about the fact that I belong to a lot of communities. A community of people who go and see particular bands, a community of people who do their shopping at South Richmond Coles, a community of people who are a little bit obsessed with knitting. Oh, come on, I'm a cripple. Craft is my spiritual home. So, I'm a music lover, I live in Richmond, I like to knit, but what else defines my community? Is it the way I look? I went home to the small country town in which I grew up for Easter, and I was sporting a new haircut, and my dad said, Stell, looking a bit emo. Once I got over the shock that my father knows what an emo is, I said, Dad, don't be ridiculous. I can't be an emo. There's no wheelchair access to the steps of Flinders Street Station. But all jokes aside, a community I do have a strong connection to is the disability community. And I don't want to open the old debate about whether there is or isn't a disability community, but for me, there's something. When I pass another wheelchair user in the street, there's that nod of understanding. You know, that smile of recognition, that "what up, brother," to my fellow wheelchair user. But I didn't always feel this way. As a young girl with a disability, I didn't think I was one of them. I wanted to be successful in exactly the same ways that my able-bodied peers wanted to be successful. And growing up in that small town, I didn't have any idea that someone with a disability could be those things. But I knew I could be those things, as long as I never admitted that I was one of you. But that all kind of fell apart when I discovered local action. I made friends with another girl who used a chair, and for me that was all right, because I shared a particular genetic trait with her, so I told myself I wasn't really making friends with the other side. But she was about to introduce me to the world of doing stuff about the things that I didn't like about the world. All of a sudden I was being carted off to International Day of People with a Disability barbecues and Women with Disabilities Network meetings. And she was giving me books on the social model of disability and teaching me about the history of this fight. It was quite a realisation that I have the life I have because other people fought for me to have it. Now, I'm not trying to suck up to the adjudicator, but she is one of the people who fought for me. She did something that changed my place in the world. Spurred on by her own experience of a good education, and then her experience as a mother, passionate about her children having a quality education, Joan Kirner took on, in her role in Parliament, responsibility for all children in Victoria. I can remember my mum and dad sitting with me watching television one Saturday night, and a lady came on TV. She was on the ABC, so I knew it was supposed to be, a serious adult program. The lady was introduced and she came on stage, opened her mouth and sang "I Love Rock and Roll" at the top of her lungs, as we just saw. Mum and Dad started laughing and chatting about what a good stick Joan is.
Yeah, I've got one too. Look.
Nice one. Excellent. Totally my people, Joan. And I asked
I
you
can't
this...
knit.
Oh, then forget it. But I asked who this woman all dressed up in leather was. And my mum said, "She's Joan Kirner, and she's the reason you can go to school with other kids." I should have realised how important local action was then. Now that I'm older and slightly wiser, I not only feel an amazing connection to people who share my lived experience of disability, but I engage in local action every day. Sometimes with others, sometimes just by myself. When those ticket inspectors won't check my ticket on the train, I chase them.
She does too. She's amazing.
When they won't check my ticket going through the barrier, I sit quietly and patiently explain that I have rights and responsibilities as a citizen to buy a ticket. You'd think they'd be over hearing me yap by now. But I'm lucky enough to work at the museum, as Joan mentioned, where I engage with different communities every day. One of my favourite communities is the 3 to 12-year-old boy set, very dinosaur obsessed. To a 5-year-old boy, there is nothing better than a dinosaur. Dinosaurs are like women will be when he's 15. But I do get to do more than just foster love of dinosaurs. At least once a day, way more on school holidays, a child asks me why I'm small and funny looking. I give them a straightforward explanation, and sometimes the conversation goes on. Like with the little girl who said, "You're little, just like that lady in The Incredibles." And I said, "Yes, I am." We had a bit of a chat about it, and she said, "I have some good news for you." And I said, "Oh, and what's your good news?" Thinking she was going to tell me she had a new cat or something. And she put her hand on my arm and she said, "I really like little people and also people who look a bit funny." I'd say that's very good news for us all. But our opposing team is right. There are threats, really big threats. Climate change is a huge threat. I know it's not going to solve the problem on its own, but I turned off my hairdryer at the switch this morning. And my kettle and my heater too. And the cynics will say that's not enough, and therefore it's not worth doing. One person doesn't make a difference. But we here in this room know differently. With solidarity, we will conquer. I look around this room and see that it's full to the brim of people who work in the community sector every day. Some who have done so for many years. It's not for the money or the glory, so why do we do it? Is it possible that local action is fun? That we do it because it gives us a sense that we're fighting for something? Perhaps we do it so that one day, even if they don't know we're responsible for it, someone else will be able to do something that we couldn't, and it will be because of us. How much fun would it be if we all threw up our hands and let these global threats sweep us away? Bugger that. However charming our opposing team might be, trying to woo you with their talk of hopelessness, I urge you to think back. I urge you to think back to how you felt yesterday when you heard Tim Flannery speak. Or this morning when you heard Pat Turner speak. Did you feel hopeless? Did you feel like their work is a waste of time? I certainly didn't. And anyone who did, you're not my people either.
You're not my people either.
In closing, these challenges that we face are big, really big. But past generations have faced challenges too. 150 years ago, we couldn't imagine an Australia where women could vote. Now we can't imagine what a disaster it would be if we weren't allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Let us all remember what Nelson Mandela said, and I wrote this before Fran Boehm's speech, so she totally stole my bit. But Nelson Mandela said, "Those who are willing to join hands can overcome the greatest challenges." Thank you.
And of course I wouldn't be influenced by your description of something very important in my and your life. I'd now like to introduce for the rebuttal, and you've got, I think we'll have to cut it down to 3, if you don't mind, Jennifer, and even if you do, so we can keep on time. Jennifer McGregor.
As I said, Rhonda told us we had to be funny, we had to be helpful, and on top of this, we had to argue an impossible position to win with this audience. She also really helpfully sent us last year's DVD so that, and I quote, we might get some tricks. Well, that was really helpful. We watched last year's debate and we discovered that the poor suckers who have to argue the position that you, the audience, and in particular the position that our Premier does not support, we're never going to win.
He's not here.
Year, former Premier, I still believe in the Premier, Joan. Last year, 2 exceptionally funny, entertaining and very helpful star performers clearly won against the team arguing for local voices and arguing against the power and value of government.
What, John Roscoe?
Surprise, surprise. No, he was on the other side.
No, was he?
Surprise, surprise. Despite a lacklustre and very unfunny performance, Joan decided that the people had voted 371 to 370 in favour of your own prejudices. That is, in favour of the power of local voices. You might like to note that Waleed Ali, who argued for the role of government, now has his own SBS comedy show, Salam Cafe. But you all thought John Roscoe was funnier and more persuasive. Shame on you. Meredith and I suspect that this is exactly what's going to happen today. Although we have obediently and faithfully followed our brief, we've done exactly what Rhonda told us to do. We have argued with devastating logic that your local action is a waste of time. It might even be immoral as it ignores the need for global equity. We've also been helpful. We've told you what you can do in the face of near certain destruction of the species, if not the planet. We've argued for global action, not local action. We've given a free plug for our community, sucked up very nicely, and given ideas for getting engaged in global action. And we've even given you a glimpse of the new world order. But we don't expect to win, so we've gone for bribery and corruption instead. So, number 1, every single seat is wired. And remember, we're the ones who know about global terrorism, so watch it, guys. We are watching how you vote. And if this doesn't work, we've got another nice strategy. Our nice strategy is we've got a free prize. It's 3 things. You can get a free trip to a kindergarten of your choice from Meredith. You can get a free trip to any number of lectures from me. They're really boring, but never mind, you can come. And a really, really fantastic, valuable prize, a free copy of Alice Pung's new book, Growing Up Asian in Australia. This one is really worth something.
And really full of local action.
Vote for us. Vote for us. No, it's not. She hasn't read it. And Joan, watch yourself, girl. No playing favourites this year.
I think I should award Jennifer and Meredith the Order of the Peppermint. just to show how unbiased I am. And now to rebut or sum up for the negative, Deb.
Other than Joan sitting on the right being neutral with the other side, and I received those discs too, but I need to tell Rhonda we didn't have a DVD to play it in our motel room, so total disadvantage about what happened last year. But it doesn't matter because local action is the most fundamental and crucial thing that all of us undertake. But what I want to do, I don't want to rebut the other team myself. I want to let the words of a group of young Aboriginal children rebut the other side. This DVD resource is a part of 3 parts. This is the second part of young children speaking to other young Aboriginal children whose mothers are in prison and telling them how they can survive and be safe while mum's there. We'll show you some local action in play.
Be strong in your culture, strong in your mind, be strong in yourself, see what you find, be strong. Hey you Mob! Hey you Mob!
This DVD we made is about keeping safe and being happy.
Especially if your mum is in prison.
Us black mobs gotta be smart. Gotta look out for ourselves.
To keep safe from family violence and sexual assault.
So make sure you listen up now. Kids have rights. On the law, rainforest is green, the rainforest is dark. We can see ancient trees with moss on the bark. The rainforest is green, the rainforest is dark. We can see. Be strong in yourself, see what you find. Be strong in your culture, strong in your mind. Be strong.
Family violence is like adults hitting each other or hitting kids. It can be people putting you down or yelling at you or making you feel bad inside. When kids hurt each other, that's family violence too.
It can be an adult or a big kid that touch your body in a wrong way.
They might touch your private parts, your breasts, your susus, your vagina, your junu, your penis, buru. This is never okay.
This is never okay.
It is against the law for adults to touch kids' private parts.
It's never okay.
It's called sexual assault.
Sometimes people say that bashing or touching kids' private parts is Aboriginal law. This is gammon. Family violence is not Aboriginal law. It's not our way and it hurts our mob. We say it's time to stop. Happy mob are a strong mob. Family violence makes us all weak. We've got to take steps to make our families happy and safe, to stay strong for the future. If we don't talk up now about physical, sexual and emotional abuse, the cycle of violence won't end.
Get together, moon man shines on the shore. And we follow the traditional law. Be strong in your culture, strong in your mind. Be strong in yourself, see what you find. Be strong in your culture, strong in your mind. Be strong in yourself, see what you find. Deadly culture, we got mad lingo. The lawmakers are the serpent and lingo. Wallaby shark in the sacred places. For them we
Family violence isn't our way. Blackfellow way is to look after each other.
better watch your back on a spiritual
So let local action speak for itself. Thank you.
Now, for your vote, I'll ask those who are voting for the affirmative team to applaud in a moment, and then after them, those who are voting for the negative team. So if you support the affirmative team, that it's about globalisation and local government, local action is not important. Please. Okay, thank you. I've got my applausometer on, and if you're voting for the negative team, that is that it's about local action, and without it, you can't make change. Please applaud. Now, who's got the cup? Oh, a civil. Can you present it down there, please?
No. Thank you.
I just want to finish by thanking the participants. It was really terrific to hear the different points of view, and I still go with my original opening that it's two parts of the whole. Global action and local action are still two parts of the whole. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. And I have to say, Stella, your performance was outstanding, and I do wish you'd be my singing and drama coach. And may I finish with these words? I've talked about power at the start, and I want to finish with talking about just using the words those young people use so movingly. A happy mob is a strong mob. Now, you're all a happy mob. Let's go out and be a strong mob. Thank you.